The call came at 0347 hours. I was in my quarters at Camp Pendleton, reviewing mission reports, when my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen in 3 years. My brother Michael's voice was cold, mechanical, like he was reading from a script he'd practiced. "Mom's gone, Sarah. Heart attack. Funeral's Thursday at St. Mark's. Don't bother coming." The line went dead before I could respond. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I sat there staring at the screen, the words echoing in the darkness of my room. Don't bother coming. To my own mother's funeral, the woman who used to sneak me extra cookies when Dad wasn't looking, who taught me how to braid my hair, who quietly slipped me $20 before I left for boot camp even though Dad had forbidden her from supporting my decision. The same woman whose last voicemail I'd saved on my phone just 2 months ago, whispering how proud she was of me when no one else was listening. But here's what my family didn't know. Here's what they couldn't have known, because I was never allowed to tell them. 3 days before that phone call, I had been standing in a secured briefing room in Washington, D.C., receiving the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism in combat operations. The citation was classified, the details sealed, but it involved pulling 17 wounded Marines out of an ambush zone in Afghanistan while under direct enemy fire. The Secretary of the Navy himself had shaken my hand and called me one of the finest officers he'd ever had the honor to meet. My family thought I was playing soldier. The Marine Corps knew I was saving lives. Growing up in Cedar Falls, Ohio, meant everyone knew everyone. And everyone had an opinion about how the Mitchell family should live their lives. My father, Bob Mitchell, owned the largest hardware store in 3 counties, a business that had been in our family for 4 generations. The plan was simple. Michael would inherit the store, Jessica would marry well and stay close to home, and I would work the register until some local boy made me his wife. But even as a little girl, I was different. While Michael played with toy trucks and Jessica dressed up her dolls, I was in the backyard building obstacle courses out of garden hoses and lawn chairs. I'd time myself crawling under tables, jumping over flower pots, army crawling through the mud. My mother would later scrub out of my clothes with a patience I didn't deserve. My father noticed, of course. Bob Mitchell noticed everything, especially when it didn't fit his vision of how things should be. "Sarah's going through a phase," he'd tell concerned neighbors who watched me doing pull-ups on the monkey bars long after the other kids had gone home. "She'll grow out of it. Girls always do." But I didn't grow out of it. If anything, I grew into it. By age 12, I could run faster than most boys in my grade. By 14, I was doing push-ups in sets of 50 and reading military history books I'd borrowed from the library. My bedroom walls were covered with maps of famous battles, not boy band posters. I studied the strategies of Patton and MacArthur while my classmates studied teen magazines. My mother, Linda, saw it all. She watched me transform from a tomboy into something else entirely, something focused and determined and quietly powerful. She never discouraged me, but she never encouraged me either. Not openly. In our house, encouragement belonged to Michael's football achievements and Jessica's beauty pageant ribbons. My accomplishments existed in the spaces between conversations, acknowledged with gentle smiles and worried glances. The first real confrontation came during my sophomore year of high school. I had been accepted into a summer leadership program at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, a competitive camp for students interested in military careers. Only 30 kids from across Ohio had been selected. I was the only girl from Cedar Falls. I brought the acceptance letter to dinner, sliding it across the table to my father while my mother served his favorite pot roast. He read it once, folded it in half, and set it beside his plate without looking up. "Sarah won't be attending," he said to my mother, as if I wasn't sitting right there. "She needs to focus on her real future, not these fantasies." "Dad, this is a huge honor," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "They only accept—" "I know what they accept," he cut me off. "And I know what happens to girls who get these kinds of ideas. You end up 35 and alone, wondering why you threw away your chance at a real life." The silence that followed was suffocating. Michael pushed his food around his plate, embarrassed by the tension. Jessica stared at her hands. My mother's face had gone pale, but she didn't speak. In our family, Dad's word was final. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, my mother knocked softly on my door. She sat on the edge of my bed and smoothed my hair the way she used to when I was little and couldn't sleep. "I saved your letter," she whispered, pulling the folded paper from her bathrobe pocket. "I know you want this. But Sarah, honey, you have to understand. Your father, he just wants what's best for you. In his mind, the best life for a woman is a safe life." I took the letter, holding it like it might disappear. "What do you think, Mom? What do you want for me?" She was quiet for so long I thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I want you to be happy. But I also want you to be careful. The world isn't always kind to girls who don't follow the rules." She kissed my forehead and left, and I never did get to attend that summer program. But I kept the letter, hidden in my jewelry box alongside the other dreams I was learning to keep secret. It was the first of many times I would discover that wanting something and being allowed to have it were two very different things. High school became a careful balancing act. I played the role my family expected while privately preparing for the life I actually wanted. I joined the cross-country team, which my father tolerated because it was still feminine enough in his mind. What he didn't know was that I was using those early morning runs to build the kind of endurance that would later help me outlast seasoned Marines in training exercises. I volunteered at the local Veterans Center, which my family saw as appropriate charity work for a young lady. What they didn't see was how I spent hours listening to combat veterans tell their stories, learning about leadership under pressure, about making life and death decisions when there was no time to think, only time to act. I dated occasionally, boys my father approved of who talked about marriage and staying in Cedar Falls forever. But those relationships never lasted long, because I couldn't pretend to want a life that felt like a cage, even a comfortable one. My grades were flawless, which pleased my father because it meant I could get a scholarship to the local community college. What he didn't know was that I was also secretly taking the practice SATs and researching military academies. I had discovered that exceptional academic performance could open doors to officer training programs, paths to leadership that didn't require family approval. The real turning point came during my senior year. I was 17, working part-time at my father's hardware store, when a customer came in looking for rope for a project. He was probably in his 40s, well-built, with the kind of posture that immediately identified him as military even in civilian clothes. As I helped him find what he needed, we started talking. His name was David Hayes, and he was a Marine colonel stationed at the recruiting office in Columbus. He was in Cedar Falls visiting his elderly parents for the weekend. "You seem pretty knowledgeable about equipment," he said as I explained the difference between various rope strengths and weights. "You work construction or something?" I laughed. "No, sir. I just like to be prepared. You never know when you might need to know something." Something in my answer must have caught his attention because he studied my face more carefully. "You ever think about military service?" The question hit me like electricity. Here was someone asking me directly about the thing I'd been dreaming about for years, the path I'd been planning in secret. "Every day, sir," I answered honestly. He nodded slowly. "What's holding you back?" I glanced toward the back office where my father was doing inventory, then back at Colonel Hayes. Family expectations, I guess. "My dad thinks it's not appropriate for girls." Colonel Hayes was quiet for a moment, then he pulled out his business card and handed it to me. "I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to listen carefully. I've been a Marine for 22 years. I've served in combat zones, I've led men and women in situations where mistakes cost lives, and I've seen leadership that would humble most people. Some of the finest officers I've ever had the privilege to serve with have been women. Courage doesn't have a gender, and neither does honor." He paused, looking me directly in the eyes. "Your father wants to protect you, and that comes from love. But protection and limitation aren't the same thing. If you're serious about this, if you really want to serve, then you owe it to yourself to explore that calling. Because the Marines need good officers, and good officers come from people who choose this path, because they can't imagine choosing anything else." I took his card, my hands trembling slightly. What would I need to do? Graduate high school with honors, which it sounds like you're going to do anyway. Take the SATs and score well. Then come talk to me about officer candidate school. We'll see what you're made of. That conversation changed everything. Not because Colonel Hayes told me anything I didn't already know about myself, but because he saw something in me that my family had missed. He saw potential where they saw stubbornness, strength where they saw defiance. I started planning that night. I researched every aspect of Marine officer training, studied the physical requirements, the academic standards, the leadership expectations. I began training in earnest, running before dawn, doing calisthenics in my bedroom, timing myself on obstacle courses I built in the woods behind our house. I told no one, not even my mother. This was my secret mission, my private preparation for the life I was going to build for myself, whether my family understood it or not. Graduation day arrived with the usual pomp and ceremony. I was valedictorian, which made my father proud in a way that was both genuine and complicated. He saw my achievement as proof that I was smart enough to make good choices, which in his mind meant choosing the safe path he'd laid out for me. The local community college had already accepted me with a full scholarship. I had a job waiting at the hardware store. There was even a boy, Danny Peterson, who had been hinting at proposing after we'd both finished our degrees. Everything was arranged, neat and tidy, and exactly what the Mitchell family expected. But 3 days after graduation, I drove to Columbus to meet with Colonel Hayes. The recruiting office was smaller than I'd expected, tucked between a coffee shop and a dry cleaner in a strip mall that had seen better days.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
But the moment I walked through the door, I felt something I'd never experienced before. I felt like I was home. Colonel Hayes was waiting for me, along with a female officer I hadn't met. "Sarah, this is Captain Maria Rodriguez. She's one of our finest officers, and she wanted to meet you." Captain Rodriguez shook my hand with a grip that was firm and confident. She was probably in her early 30s, compact and athletic, with intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Colonel Hayes has told me a lot about you," she said. "He thinks you might have what it takes to lead Marines. But I'm going to ask you some hard questions first, because being an officer isn't just about being tough. It's about making decisions that affect other people's lives, sometimes under conditions most people can't imagine." For the next 2 hours, they put me through the most challenging interview of my life. They asked about leadership, about ethics, about how I would handle various scenarios involving life and death decisions. They tested my knowledge of current events, my understanding of military history, my physical fitness standards. When it was over, Captain Rodriguez leaned back in her chair and smiled. "You know what I see when I look at you? I see someone who's been preparing for this her whole life without even knowing it. You've got the intelligence, the physical capability, and most importantly, the moral foundation we need in our officers." Colonel Hayes nodded. "The question is, are you ready to commit to this path? Because once you sign up for officer candidate school, there's no going back. You'll be a Marine, and Marines don't quit." I thought about my father's disappointed face when he learned what I'd done. I thought about my mother's worried expressions and my siblings' confusion. I thought about the safe, predictable life that was waiting for me back in Cedar Falls. Then I thought about the feeling I'd had walking into this office, the sense of finally finding the place where I belonged. "Yes, sir," I said. "I'm ready." The paperwork took 3 hours. By the time I drove home that evening, I was committed to reporting to officer candidate school at Quantico in 8 weeks. All I had to do now was tell my family that I was about to destroy every plan they'd ever made for my life. I chose to tell them at dinner, the same way I'd tried to share the leadership camp opportunity years earlier. But this time, I wasn't asking for permission. I was announcing a decision that was already made. I waited until everyone had been served, until the conversation had settled into the comfortable routine of daily updates and family news. Then I set my fork down and looked around the table at the faces I'd known my whole life. "I have something to tell you all," I said. "I've enlisted in the Marine Corps. I leave for officer candidate school in 8 weeks." The silence was absolute. Michael stopped chewing. Jessica's eyes went wide. My mother's hand flew to her throat, and my father's face went through a series of expressions I'd never seen before. Surprise, confusion, anger, and finally, something that looked like betrayal. "No," he said quietly. "No, you haven't." "Dad," I'm 18. I've already signed the papers. He stood up so quickly his chair fell backward. Then you can unsign them. This is not happening, Sarah. I won't allow it. You can't stop me, I said, my voice steady even though my heart was pounding. This is what I want. This is what I'm called to do. Called? He was shouting now, something he rarely did. Called by who? You think God is calling you to go play war? You think this is some kind of noble destiny? My mother finally found her voice. Sarah, honey, please. Think about this. The military is dangerous. People get hurt. People die. People also serve, I replied. People protect others. People make a difference. My father slammed his palm on the table, making the dishes rattle. I have worked my entire life to build something for this family. Something stable, something safe. And you want to throw it all away to go crawl around in the dirt with a bunch of men who will never respect you. The Marines will respect me if I earn it, I said. Just like anywhere else. You're living in a fantasy, he shouted. You think you're going to be some kind of hero, but all you're going to be is a disappointment. To them, to us, and eventually to yourself. The words hit like physical blows, but I had been preparing for this moment for years. I had known that choosing my own path would mean disappointing the people who loved me. But I had also learned that disappointing others was sometimes the price of not disappointing yourself. I'm sorry you feel that way, I said quietly, but this is my decision. My father looked around the table at my mother and siblings, then back at me. When he spoke again, his voice was cold and final. If you walk out that door to go play soldier, don't bother coming back. You'll be no daughter of mine. I stood up, my legs steadier than I'd expected them to be. Then I guess this is goodbye. I walked upstairs, packed a single bag with my most important belongings, and left the house where I'd grown up. My mother followed me to the front porch, tears streaming down her face. Sarah, please, she whispered. Don't do this. Your father will come around. He always does. I hugged her tightly, memorizing the feeling. I love you, Mom. But I can't live someone else's life just to keep the peace. I have to be who I am. She held me for a long moment, then stepped back and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. For just an instant, I thought I saw something that might have been pride. Be safe, she whispered. Be strong. And remember that no matter what happens, no matter what anyone says, you will always be my daughter. I drove away that night with everything I owned in the backseat of my car and no idea when I'd see my family again. I was 18 years old, completely alone, and about to embark on the most challenging experience of my life. I had never been more terrified or more certain that I was doing exactly what I was meant to do. Officer Candidate School at Quantico was designed to break people. That was the point. In the first week alone, 15 candidates dropped out. Unable to handle the physical demands, the mental pressure, or the complete reconstruction of everything they thought they knew about themselves. I thrived. Every morning began at 05:00 with physical training that pushed my body beyond what I'd thought possible. We ran until our legs felt like concrete, did calisthenics until our muscles screamed, and then did more, because quitting wasn't an option. The drill instructors were relentless, creative in their ability to find weakness and exploit it until you either broke or became stronger than you'd ever imagined. But the physical challenges were nothing compared to the mental ones. Leadership exercises where split-second decisions determined whether your unit succeeded or failed. Ethics scenarios where there were no perfect answers. Only the responsibility to choose and live with the consequences. Academic courses that covered everything from military law to international relations, to the psychology of leadership under stress. I excelled at all of it, but success at OCS wasn't just about individual achievement. It was about learning to be part of something larger than yourself, about understanding that leadership meant serving others, not commanding them. Some of the brightest candidates washed out because they couldn't grasp that fundamental principle. 3 months into the program, I received my first letter from home. It wasn't from my father or my siblings, but from my mother, written in her careful handwriting on the floral stationery she used for special occasions. Dear Sarah, it began. I hope you're safe and well. Your father forbade me from writing, but I couldn't bear the thought of you thinking we'd forgotten about you. Michael started college last month and is doing well in his business classes. Jessica got engaged to Tommy Richardson. Your father hired a new girl to work your shifts at the store, but he hasn't been the same since you left. He doesn't talk about you, but I see him looking at your empty chair at dinner sometimes. The letter went on to share small details about life in Cedar Falls, the kind of ordinary news that takes on extraordinary significance when you're hundreds of miles away from home, living a life your family can't understand. She ended with words that I read so many times I memorized them. I'm proud of you for following your heart, even though it scared me to watch you go. Be careful, my brave girl, and remember that you always have a home here, no matter what anyone says. I kept that letter in my footlocker and read it whenever the training got particularly brutal, or when homesickness threatened to overwhelm my determination. It reminded me that somewhere in the world, someone believed in what I was doing, even if she couldn't say so openly. The final phase of OCS was a field exercise designed to test everything we'd learned. We were divided into squads and given a series of missions that required leadership, tactical thinking, and flawless execution under pressure. The scenarios were based on real combat situations, and the consequences of failure, while not lethal, were designed to feel as close to real as possible. I was chosen to lead my squad during the final exercise, a reconnaissance mission that required us to navigate hostile territory, gather intelligence, and extract without being detected. It was the kind of operation that demanded every skill we'd developed: physical endurance, tactical knowledge, and the ability to make split-second decisions while keeping your team safe. The mission went perfectly, until it didn't. 3 hours in, one of my squad members, a candidate named Johnson who'd been struggling throughout the program, made a critical error that exposed our position to the opposing force. We were pinned down, surrounded, with no clear path to extraction. In that moment, with simulated enemy fire coming from 3 directions, and my squad looking to me for leadership, I felt something click into place. All the training, all the preparation, all the years of knowing I was meant for something more than what my family had planned for me crystallized into absolute clarity. I assessed the situation, identified our options, and made the call. We would create a diversion that would allow most of the squad to escape, while I drew enemy fire away from their position. It was risky, but it was the only way to complete the mission and get my people out safely. The plan worked flawlessly. My squad completed the extraction while I evaded capture long enough to reach the secondary rally point. When the exercise ended and the evaluations were complete, our tactical instructor, a grizzled sergeant with 20 years of combat experience, pulled me aside. "Candidate Mitchell," he said, "in 15 years of running these exercises, I've seen maybe half a dozen displays of leadership that impressed me. What you did out there today was one of them. You put mission accomplishment and the welfare of your Marines above your own safety. That's what we're looking for in an officer." 3 weeks later, I graduated from officer candidate school as one of the top performers in my class. As I walked across the stage to receive my commission as a second lieutenant in the United States Marine Corps, I thought about my father's prediction that I would be a disappointment. Looking out at the audience filled with families celebrating their new officers, I felt a brief stab of sadness that mine wasn't there to see this moment. But the sadness was overwhelmed by something else: absolute certainty that I was exactly where I belonged. My first assignment was to the basic school at Quantico, where new officers learned the specific skills they would need as Marine leaders. It was 6 months of intensive training in everything from weapons systems to logistics to small unit tactics. More importantly, it was where I began to understand what it truly meant to be responsible for the lives of other Marines. The honor code at TBS was simple: integrity, honor, commitment. These weren't just words painted on walls. They were the foundation of everything we did. I watched candidates who had excelled at OCS wash out because they couldn't maintain those standards under pressure. I saw others discover reserves of strength and character they hadn't known they possessed. I fell into the latter category. Every challenge revealed new capabilities. Every test showed me that my limits were further than I'd imagined. I wasn't just surviving the training. I was mastering it. During field exercises, I found myself naturally taking charge, even when I wasn't officially in command. Other lieutenants began seeking my advice on tactical problems. Instructors started using my performance as an example of how things should be done. It wasn't arrogance, it was competence backed by an absolute commitment to excellence. I had discovered that leadership wasn't about being the loudest or the toughest. It was about being the person others could count on when everything went wrong. My specialty became infantry operations, the sharp end of Marine combat capability. I learned to call in artillery strikes, coordinate air support, and lead Marines in close combat. But more than technical skills, I learned how to inspire confidence in people who were far from home, scared, and depending on me to bring them back alive. The first time someone called me ma'am, with genuine respect rather than obligation, I felt a shift in my identity. I wasn't just Sarah Mitchell from Cedar Falls anymore. I was Lieutenant Mitchell, United States Marine Corps, and that title carried weight and responsibility I was proud to bear. Letters from my mother continued to arrive regularly, full of local news and careful affection. She never mentioned my father's reaction to my career choice, but she didn't need to. The fact that she was writing in secret told me everything I needed to know about the division my decision had created in my family. Michael had taken over more responsibilities at the hardware store and was apparently thriving in his role as the heir apparent. Jessica had married Tommy Richardson in what my mother described as the most beautiful wedding Cedar Falls had ever seen. Life was moving forward without me, just as I'd known it would. But there were small signs that my absence had created a space that couldn't quite be filled. My mother mentioned that my father had framed my high school graduation photo and kept it on his desk at the store, though he never spoke about me. She told me about the day a Marine recruiter had come into the hardware store, and my father had helped him find everything he needed without charge, claiming it was a military discount he'd never offered before. These details painted a picture of a man struggling with a decision he couldn't undo, and a daughter he couldn't understand but hadn't entirely written off. It gave me hope that someday, somehow, we might find our way back to each other. That hope sustained me through the demanding months of training and the uncertainty of what would come next. Because after TBS, I would receive my first real assignment, my first opportunity to lead Marines in actual military operations rather than training exercises. I graduated from the basic school ranked second in my class, with orders to report to Camp Pendleton, California for assignment to an infantry battalion. It was exactly what I'd hoped for, a chance to put my training to work in a real unit with real responsibilities. The day before I left Quantico, I received an unexpected visitor. Colonel Hayes, the man who had first encouraged me to pursue my military dreams, appeared at my barracks with a small gift wrapped in brown paper. "I heard you were shipping out to Pendleton," he said with a smile. "Thought you might want this." Inside the package was a book, Leading Marines, the definitive guide to Marine Corps leadership philosophy. But it wasn't just any copy. This one was worn with use, filled with handwritten notes in the margins, and inscribed with personal messages from some of the Corps' most respected leaders. "This belonged to my mentor when I was a young lieutenant," Colonel Hayes explained. "He gave it to me when I made captain, and I've been waiting for the right person to pass it on to. I think that person is you." I held the book carefully, understanding the weight of what he was giving me. This wasn't just a training manual, it was a legacy, a connection to the long line of Marine leaders who had faced the same challenges I was about to encounter. "I won't let you down, sir," I promised. "I know you won't," he replied. "But more than that, I know you won't let yourself down. That's what makes a good officer great." As I packed my few belongings for the cross-country drive to California, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this point. 18 months earlier, I had been a small-town girl with big dreams and no clear path to achieve them. Now first was a Marine officer with specialized training, proven leadership ability, and orders to join one of the Corps' most elite units. The transformation hadn't been easy. There had been moments of doubt, times when the physical demands seemed impossible, instances when the responsibility of leadership felt overwhelming. But each challenge had revealed new strength. Each test had proven that I was capable of more than I'd ever imagined. I thought about my family and the gulf that had opened between us. I thought about my father's conviction that I was making a terrible mistake, and my mother's quiet support despite her fears. I thought about the path not taken, the safe life I could have had in Cedar Falls. But as I drove west toward my new assignment, toward the next chapter of my military career, I felt no regret. I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do. The girl who had built obstacle courses in her backyard had grown into a woman capable of leading Marines in combat. My phone rang as I crossed into Nevada, the desert stretching endlessly in all directions. It was my mother, calling from the store during her lunch break when she could speak freely. "I just wanted to hear your voice before you start your new job," she said. "I know I can't call as often once you're in California." "You can call any time, Mom. It means everything to me." There was a pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. "Sarah, I need you to know something. What you've accomplished, this thing you've become, it's extraordinary. I may not understand all of it, but I understand that you found your purpose. That's more than most people ever do." "Thank you, Mom. That means more than you know." "I love you, sweetheart. Be safe out there." As the call ended, and I continued driving toward my future, I felt a deep sense of peace. I was a long way from the hardware store in Cedar Falls, far from the family that couldn't understand my choices. But I was exactly where I belonged, ready to face whatever challenges awaited me as a Marine officer. The young woman who had once been told she was wasting her time with fantasies of military service was about to discover just how real those fantasies could become. And in the months and years ahead, I would prove not just to my family but to myself that some dreams are worth fighting for, no matter how impossible they might seem to those who lack the courage to pursue them. The Pacific coast appeared on the horizon as I approached Camp Pendleton, and I felt a surge of anticipation for what lay ahead. This was just the beginning of my story as a Marine, the first chapter of a career that would take me places and show me things I couldn't yet imagine. But in that moment, driving toward my destiny with the windows down and the desert wind in my hair, I was simply a young officer ready to serve her country and prove that sometimes the most unlikely dreams become the most extraordinary realities. Camp Pendleton sprawled across 125,000 acres of Southern California coastline, a massive training ground that had been forging Marines since World War II. As I drove through the main gate for the first time, I felt the weight of that history settling around me like a mantle. This wasn't just another military base. It was hallowed ground where ordinary men and women had been transformed into something extraordinary. My assignment was to the 1st Battalion, 5th Marine Regiment, one of the most decorated units in Corps history. They had fought in every major conflict since their formation, earning battle honors from below Wood to Fallujah. Now I would have the privilege of leading a platoon of Marines who carried on that legacy. Battalion headquarters was a study in organized chaos. Marines moved with purpose through corridors lined with unit citations and photographs of fallen heroes. The smell of gun oil and strong coffee permeated everything, mixed with the subtle scent of ocean air that drifted in from the nearby Pacific. Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison was my new commanding officer, a compact man with steel-gray hair and eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. He had the bearing of someone who had seen combat and understood its costs but also its necessity. "Lieutenant Mitchell," he said as I reported for duty, "I've read your file. Impressive academic record, top marks in leadership evaluations. But academic excellence and real-world performance are two different things. Out here, your Marines don't care about your test scores. They care about whether you can bring them home alive." "Yes, sir, I understand." "Do you?" He studied me carefully. "Because in 6 weeks, this battalion deploys to Afghanistan. Your platoon will be conducting combat operations in some of the most dangerous terrain on Earth. These aren't training exercises anymore, Lieutenant. This is the real thing." The reality of impending deployment hit me like a physical force. Everything I had trained for, everything I had prepared for, was about to be tested in actual combat. The theoretical scenarios I had mastered would soon become life-and-death decisions affecting real Marines under my command. "I'm ready, sir," I said, and meant it. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison nodded slowly. "We'll see. Your platoon sergeant is Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez. He's been with this unit for 8 years, has 4 combat deployments under his belt. Listen to him, learn from him, but remember that when things go sideways, they'll be looking to you for leadership. Don't let them down. 1st Platoon Bravo Company was waiting for me in the squad bay when I arrived. 36 Marines, most of them younger than me, all of them watching to see what kind of officer they'd been assigned. The silence was heavy with evaluation as I walked to the front of the room. Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez was exactly what you'd expect from a career Marine. Compact, weathered, with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. He called the platoon to attention as I entered, and the sharp sound of boots hitting the deck in unison sent a thrill through me that I tried not to show. "Good morning, Marines," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the room. "I'm Lieutenant Mitchell, your new platoon commander. Over the next 6 weeks, we're going to train together, deploy together, and depend on each other in ways that will test everything you think you know about yourselves." I paused, meeting the eyes of as many Marines as I could. Some looked skeptical, others curious, a few openly hostile. All of them were measuring me, wondering if this young female officer could handle the responsibility of leading them into combat. I'm not going to stand here and tell you I've done this before, because I haven't. What I will tell you is that I've trained my entire life for this opportunity, and I will not let you down. In return, I expect your best effort, your honest feedback, and your commitment to the mission. Questions? A lance corporal in the second row raised his hand. "Ma'am, have you ever been in combat?" "No, I haven't. But neither have most of you. We're going to learn together, and we're going to do it right." The honesty seemed to surprise them. I could have tried to bluff, could have relied on rank to shut down questions, but that would have been a mistake. These Marines needed to trust me, and trust had to be earned through competence and honesty, not demanded through authority. After dismissing the platoon, Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez approached me with a careful expression. "Permission to speak freely, ma'am?" "Always, Gunny. I need your honest assessment of everything. These are good Marines, but they've never been tested. Neither have you. The next 6 weeks will determine whether we're ready for what's waiting for us in Afghanistan. It's going to be intense. I'm counting on it, Gunny. What do you recommend we focus on?" For the next hour, we discussed training priorities, individual Marine strengths and weaknesses, and the specific challenges we would face in our area of operations. Rodriguez was a master of small unit tactics, with an encyclopedic knowledge of how Marines fought and died in close combat. More importantly, he understood how to mold individual Marines into a cohesive fighting unit. The training that followed was the most demanding of my life. Every day brought new challenges designed to test our capabilities under stress. We practiced urban warfare in mock villages, conducted nighttime raids on simulated enemy positions, and ran endless scenarios where split-second decisions meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. But it wasn't just tactical training. I spent hours with each squad, learning about my Marines as individuals. There was Corporal Jenkins, a soft-spoken kid from Montana who could hit targets others couldn't even see. Lance Corporal Washington, a former gang member from Detroit who had found purpose and direction in the Corps. Private First Class Taylor, barely 18 years old, who wrote letters to his girlfriend every night and carried her picture in his helmet. Each of them had their own story, their own reasons for becoming Marines, their own fears about the deployment ahead. My job was to understand those individual threads and weave them into something stronger than the sum of its parts. 3 weeks into our training cycle, we received word that had been dreading. Intelligence reports indicated that our area of operations in Afghanistan had seen a significant increase in enemy activity. What had been planned as a relatively routine deployment was now being classified as a high-risk combat mission. The mood in the platoon shifted immediately. The jokes became less frequent, the focus more intense. These Marines understood that they were preparing for something that could easily cost them their lives, and that knowledge changed everything. I found myself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling and wondering if I was truly ready for the responsibility I was about to shoulder. 36 Marines would be depending on my leadership, my judgment, my ability to make the right decisions under conditions of extreme stress and danger. The doubt was natural, Rodriguez assured me during one of our evening planning sessions. Every officer faced it before their first deployment. The key was not to let it paralyze you, but to use it as motivation to be better prepared than you thought possible. Fear keeps you sharp, he said. Overconfidence gets people killed. The fact that you're worried tells me you understand what's at stake. During our final field exercise before deployment, my platoon was tasked with clearing a fortified compound while under simulated enemy fire. It was the kind of operation we would likely face in Afghanistan: complex, dangerous, and requiring precise coordination between multiple squads. The mission started badly. Our initial assault was detected early, forcing us to adapt our plan on the fly. 2 Marines were wounded by simulated IED explosions, requiring immediate medical evacuation while maintaining offensive pressure. The communications equipment malfunctioned, leaving me without contact with higher headquarters. In short, everything that could go wrong did go wrong, exactly as it would in real combat. But something remarkable happened in that chaos. My Marines didn't panic, didn't freeze, didn't fall apart under pressure. They adapted, improvised, and continued to fight as a coordinated unit. Corporal Jenkins took over fire team leadership when his squad leader was, quote, Lance Corporal Washington organized the casualty evacuation while maintaining suppressive fire. Private Taylor, despite being the youngest Marine in the platoon, crawled through simulated enemy fire to retrieve critical intelligence from the objective. I watched them perform under pressure and felt a surge of pride that almost overwhelmed me. These weren't just Marines anymore. They were my Marines, and they were magnificent. The exercise evaluators declared it a complete success, but more importantly, I saw something in my Marines' faces that hadn't been there before. Confidence. They had been tested and hadn't broken. They trusted each other, and gradually they were beginning to trust me. Our final week at Pendleton was dedicated to equipment preparation and last-minute briefings. We cleaned weapons until they gleamed, packed and repacked our gear, and memorized maps of terrain we would soon know intimately. The administrative details of deployment were mind-numbing but essential. Wills updated, insurance forms completed, emergency contact information verified. I called my mother the night before we shipped out, using a satellite phone that would be my primary link to home during the deployment. She answered on the first ring, as if she had been waiting by the phone. "Sarah, how are you, sweetheart?" "I'm good, Mom. We deploy tomorrow." There was a long pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was carefully controlled. "Where are you going?" "Afghanistan. I can't give you specifics, but we'll be there for 7 months." "Are you scared?" The question surprised me with its directness. My mother rarely asked about my feelings so bluntly. "A little," I admitted. "But I'm ready. My Marines are ready. We've trained for this." "I wish..." she started, then stopped. "What, Mom?" "I wish your father could see what you've become. I wish he could understand that this isn't some childhood fantasy. You're protecting people, Sarah. You're making a difference. Maybe someday he'll understand. Maybe. In the meantime, you take care of yourself out there. Come home safe to us." "I will, Mom. I love you." "I love you too, sweetheart. More than you'll ever know." The flight to Afghanistan took 18 hours with refueling stops in Germany and Kuwait. 36 Marines crammed into transport aircraft with all their gear, trying to sleep in uncomfortable positions while their minds raced with thoughts of what awaited them. I used the flight time to review our operational plans one final time, memorizing every detail of our area of responsibility. The Helmand province had been a Taliban stronghold for years, with American and coalition forces fighting to establish security and stability in an Aralam region that had known little of either. Our mission was to work with Afghan National Army units to clear insurgent forces from a series of rural villages, then hold those areas long enough to establish functioning local government. It sounded straightforward on paper, but I knew that reality would be far more complex. As our aircraft began its descent into Kandahar airfield, I looked around at my Marines. Some were sleeping, others staring out the small windows at the alien landscape below. A few were writing letters they hoped they wouldn't need to send. "Listen up," I said, loud enough to be heard over the engine noise. "In about 20 minutes, we're going to land in a country that most of the world has given up on. But we haven't given up, and we never will. We're Marines. We don't abandon missions, and we don't abandon each other. Whatever happens out there, we face it together." Corporal Jenkins nodded from across the aisle. Hoorah, ma'am! The response was taken up by the entire platoon, a low growl of determination that seemed to vibrate through the aircraft. Hoorah! As we touched down in Afghanistan, I felt the weight of command settle fully onto my shoulders. These Marines were my responsibility now, in the truest sense of the word. Their lives, their safety, their success or failure would depend on the decisions I made in the days and months ahead. I thought briefly of my father, of his conviction that I was unprepared for the realities of military service. I thought of my family back in Cedar Falls, living their safe, predictable lives while I prepared to lead Marines into combat. But mostly, I thought about the job ahead of us, and my determination to bring every one of these Marines home safely. Whatever challenges awaited us in the hostile mountains and valleys of Afghanistan, we would meet them together. As Marines, the war was about to begin in earnest, and Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell was ready to discover what she was truly made of. The first 3 months in Afghanistan passed in a blur of patrol bases, midnight raids, and the constant tension of operating in hostile territory. My platoon had settled into the rhythm of combat operations, and what had started as 36 strangers thrown together by chance had evolved into something far more powerful. A brotherhood forged by shared danger and absolute dependence on each other. We had seen combat, real combat, not the sanitized training exercises of Camp Pendleton. IED explosions that left your ears ringing for hours and your hands shaking with adrenaline. Firefights where the difference between life and death came down to muscle memory and the Marine next to you returning accurate fire while you moved to better positions. Moments when split-second decisions meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Through it all, my Marines had performed magnificently. They had adapted to conditions that would have broken lesser men, maintained their sense of humor despite the constant stress, and demonstrated the kind of courage that couldn't be taught in any classroom. More importantly, they had learned to trust me, and I had learned to trust them. The radio call came at 0347 on a Tuesday morning in March. I was in my quarters at Forward Operating Base Chapman, reviewing intelligence reports for our next patrol, when the secure communications system crackled to life with an emergency frequency transmission. Lightning 6, this is Overwatch. We have a priority extraction mission for your immediate response. How copy? Lightning 6 was my call sign, a designation that still gave me a thrill of professional pride every time I heard it. I grabbed the handset and responded immediately. Overwatch. This is Lightning 6. Send your traffic. Lightning 6, we have a downed aircraft approximately 12 clicks northeast of your position. Bird went down during a medical evacuation mission. 4 crew members, 2 wounded Afghan soldiers on board. Enemy forces are moving toward the crash site. You are tasked with immediate extraction of all personnel. My blood went cold. A downed aircraft meant Marines were in immediate danger, surrounded by enemy forces in hostile territory. Time was critical, and every minute we delayed meant a higher probability that this would become a recovery mission rather than a rescue. Overwatch. Lightning 6 copies. What's the enemy situation at the crash site? Unknown at this time. Last communication from the aircraft indicated they were taking fire from multiple positions. Estimate company-sized enemy force in the area. A company-sized force meant potentially over 100 enemy fighters, well-armed and motivated to prevent us from reaching the crash site. The mathematics of the situation were brutal. My platoon of 36 Marines against odds of nearly 3-1, operating in unfamiliar terrain, under time pressure that made careful planning impossible. Overwatch. What air support is available? Negative on close air support at this time. All available aircraft are committed to ongoing operations. You're on your own until we can redirect assets. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of command settle onto my shoulders like a physical burden. In training, there had always been backup plans, safety nets, instructors ready to halt exercises if things went too badly wrong. But this was real, and the only thing standing between those Marines at the crash site and capture or death was my platoon and the decisions I was about to make. Overwatch. Lightning 6 copies all. We are moving to the crash site immediately. We'll report when on target. Roger, Lightning 6. Good luck. I was already reaching for my gear as I keyed the radio to contact my squad leaders. All Lightning elements, this is Lightning 6. Emergency muster in the briefing room in 5 minutes. Combat load, we are stepping off immediately. The response was instantaneous. Within 3 minutes, all my squad leaders were assembled, faces alert despite the early hour. Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez appeared with a detailed map of our area of operations, already marked with the crash site coordinates. Gentlemen, I began, we have Marines down. Aircraft crashed 12 clicks northeast. Enemy forces moving to the site. Our mission is simple. Get there first, secure the area, extract all personnel. Any questions? Corporal Jenkins raised his hand. Ma'am, what's the enemy strength? Estimated company-sized force. We'll be outnumbered, but we'll have the advantage of speed and surprise. We hit them hard and fast, establish a perimeter, and get our people out. Staff Sergeant Williams, my weapons squad leader, studied the map intently. Ma'am, that's rough terrain. Lots of places for them to set up ambushes. How do we approach without walking into a trap? It was a good question, the kind of tactical thinking that separated experienced Marines from recruits. The route to the crash site led through a series of narrow valleys and ridgelines that were perfect for enemy ambushes. A conventional approach would likely result in my platoon being decimated before we ever reached the objective. We split into 3 elements, I decided, tracing routes on the map with my finger. First squad takes the direct route along the valley floor. They'll draw enemy attention and fix them in place. Second squad moves along the northern ridgeline to establish overwatch positions. Third squad comes in from the south and hits the enemy from their flank once they're engaged with first squad. Rodriguez nodded approvingly. Classic fire and movement. What about extraction once we reach the site? We establish a defensive perimeter around the crash site and call for helicopter extraction. The key is speed. We need to reach those Marines before the enemy can organize a coordinated attack. The briefing took 8 minutes. Within 15 minutes of receiving the mission, my entire platoon was loaded into vehicles and moving toward the crash site. As we drove through the pre-dawn darkness, I felt the familiar mixture of fear and anticipation that preceded every combat operation. But this was different. This wasn't a planned mission with days of preparation and intelligence gathering. This was immediate, urgent, with American lives hanging in the balance. The Marines at that crash site were depending on us, and failure wasn't an option. The terrain was even worse than the map had indicated. Narrow roads carved into rocky hillsides, perfect terrain for ambushes and IED attacks. Our vehicles moved in tactical formation, with gunners scanning for threats while drivers navigated roads that seemed designed to break axles and trap unwary convoys. 2 clicks from the crash site, we dismounted and continued on foot. The silence was absolute, except for the sound of our boots on rocky ground and the distant rumble of aircraft engines somewhere overhead. My Marines moved with the fluid grace of professionals, weapons ready, eyes constantly scanning for threats. Then we heard it, the distinctive crack of Alaska 47 fire echoing off the valley walls, followed by the heavier boom of RPG explosions. The crash site was under attack and we were still a kilometer away. Double time, I ordered, and my Marines responded immediately. We moved as fast as the terrain would allow, weapons at the ready, every sense heightened by the knowledge that we were moving toward active combat. The crash site came into view as we crested a small ridge. The helicopter had gone down in a relatively flat area surrounded by low hills. Perfect terrain for the enemy to establish firing positions. I could see muzzle flashes from at least 6 different locations, all directed toward the wreckage where our Marines were taking cover. But what I saw next made my blood run cold. The helicopter had burned after impact, sending a pillar of black smoke into the morning sky that could be seen for miles. And moving toward the crash site from the north was a line of enemy fighters, at least 40 strong, advancing in a coordinated assault. Lightning elements, this is Lightning 6, I radioed to my squad leaders. Enemy force is larger than expected and moving to overrun the crash site. We execute the plan now. First squad, you have the lead. Second squad, Get to those overwatch positions and start putting fire on the enemy advance. 3rd Squad, stand by for my signal to hit them from the south. The attack developed exactly as planned. 1st Squad moved directly toward the crash site, immediately drawing enemy fire and forcing them to reveal their positions. 2nd Squad reached the northern ridgeline and began engaging enemy fighters with precision rifle fire, disrupting their advance and forcing them to take cover. That's when I gave 3rd Squad the signal to attack. What followed was 40 minutes of the most intense combat I had ever experienced. My Marines fought with a skill and determination that would have made their drill instructors weep with pride. They moved with precision under fire, supported each other without being told, and maintained their discipline. Even when enemy fire came so close, you could feel the pressure waves from near misses. Corporal Jenkins led a squad assault that cleared 3 enemy positions and opened a corridor to the crash site. Lance Corporal Washington carried a wounded Marine to safety while under direct fire, refusing medical attention for his own wounds until everyone else had been treated. Private Taylor, the youngest Marine in the platoon, single-handedly destroyed an enemy machine gun position that had been pinning down our assault element. But it was what happened when we reached the crash site that would stay with me forever. The helicopter had indeed burned, but the crew and passengers had survived the initial impact. They had taken cover in a small depression near the wreckage and were holding off enemy attacks with whatever weapons they could salvage from the aircraft. Among the survivors was Captain Rebecca Morrison, the daughter of my battalion commander, who had been serving as a medical officer on the evacuation flight. She was wounded but still functional, treating the other survivors with supplies from her medical kit. When she saw me approaching, her face showed a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Lieutenant Mitchell, how did you get here so fast?" "Marines don't leave Marines behind, ma'am," I replied, then keyed my radio. "Lightning elements, this is Lightning 6. We have positive control of the crash site. Prepare for immediate extraction of 6 personnel." But the enemy wasn't finished with us. As we organized the wounded for helicopter extraction, enemy reinforcements arrived from the east, threatening to overrun our positions. My Marines had been fighting for almost an hour, ammunition was running low, and we were still outnumbered by at least 2 to 1. That's when Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez made a decision that epitomized everything the Marine Corps stands for. He organized a counterattack using our remaining able-bodied Marines, personally leading the assault that drove the enemy back long enough for the extraction helicopters to arrive. I watched him move across that battlefield like he owned it, directing fire, encouraging Marines, and demonstrating the kind of leadership that couldn't be taught in any school. He took a rifle round through the shoulder, but continued fighting until every Marine was safely aboard the extraction aircraft. The flight back to base was surreal. We had accomplished the mission, extracted all personnel from the crash site, and defeated a superior enemy force. But the cost had been significant. 3 of my Marines required medical evacuation, including Rodriguez, who would spend the next month in a military hospital. More importantly, word of our actions spread quickly through the military community. A platoon-sized element had successfully conducted an emergency extraction against overwhelming odds, demonstrated exceptional tactical competence, and brought everyone home alive. It was the kind of operation that becomes legendary within military circles. 2 weeks later, I received a secure communication that would change everything. It was from the Commandant of the Marine Corps himself, informing me that my platoon was being recommended for a unit citation, and that I was being considered for early promotion to captain. But more than the recognition, more than the commendations and official praise, was the knowledge that I had proven something to myself and to my Marines. When everything was on the line, when the situation was desperate and the odds were against us, we had performed magnificently. My father's prediction that I would be a disappointment seemed like something from another lifetime, spoken by someone who had no understanding of what real strength looked like. I was no longer the small-town girl who had left Cedar Falls with big dreams and no clear path. I was a combat-tested Marine officer who had led troops in battle and brought them home safely. The war was far from over, and there would be other missions, other challenges, other moments when everything would depend on split-second decisions made under impossible pressure. But I had learned something invaluable during that rescue mission. I was exactly where I belonged, doing exactly what I was meant to do. 3 months later, my deployment ended, and my platoon returned to Camp Pendleton with battle honors and a reputation that preceded us wherever we went. The Marines, who had questioned my leadership ability, now spoke of me with genuine respect. The NCOs, who had been skeptical of a young female officer, now treated me as an equal, someone who had proven herself under fire. But it was a conversation with Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, whose daughter I had helped rescue, that put everything into perspective. "Lieutenant Mitchell," he said as I reported for post-deployment debriefing, "what you did out there, what your Marines accomplished, it was extraordinary. You saved my daughter's life, and I'll never forget that." "Sir, my Marines deserve all the credit. I just pointed them in the right direction." He smiled. "That's exactly what a good officer says. But I want you to know something. In 30 years of military service, I've seen a lot of leaders, good ones and bad ones. What you demonstrated in Afghanistan wasn't just competence or courage. It was something rarer. The ability to inspire others to be better than they thought they could be." As I walked out of that debriefing, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this point. From a small-town girl who built obstacle courses in her backyard to a combat-tested Marine officer who had led troops in battle. It had been a long road, marked by sacrifice and separation from family, but it had led me to discover who I really was. The phone call about my mother's death would come 6 months later, followed by my brother's cold dismissal and the family's decision to ban me from the funeral. But in that moment, walking across the parade ground at Camp Pendleton, I felt a deep sense of accomplishment that no one could take away from me. I was Captain Sarah Mitchell, United States Marine Corps, and I had earned every bit of respect that title carried. The funeral was scheduled for 10 in the morning at St. Mark's Lutheran Church, the same building where my family had attended services for as long as I could remember. I knew this because Emma Rodriguez, my childhood friend who still lived in Cedar Falls, had called me with the details after seeing the obituary in the local newspaper. "Sarah, I'm so sorry about your mom," she had said, her voice thick with emotion. "The service is Thursday. I thought you should know, even if my family doesn't want me there," I finished for her. "I can't believe they said that to you. After everything you've accomplished, everything you've sacrificed for this country." But I could believe it. 5 years had passed since I'd left home to join the Marines. 5 years during which I had become someone my family couldn't recognize or understand. To them, I was still the stubborn girl who had chosen military fantasies over family responsibility. They had no knowledge of the decorated officer I had become, the lives I had saved, the respect I had earned from Marines who would follow me anywhere. I made the decision to attend anyway. Not because I needed their permission, but because my mother deserved to have someone there who understood what she had meant to me. Someone who remembered the woman who had quietly encouraged my dreams even when she couldn't openly support them. The drive from California to Ohio took 3 days. I could have flown, but I needed the time to prepare myself mentally for what was coming. I wore my dress blues for the journey, the uniform I had earned through 4 years of military service, 2 combat deployments, and more challenges than my family could imagine. The medals on my chest told a story they had never bothered to learn. The Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism in combat. The Purple Heart for wounds received in action. The combat action ribbon that marked me as someone who had faced enemy fire and prevailed. But to my family, they would probably look like costume jewelry, meaningless decorations for a game they thought I was playing. I arrived in Cedar Falls on Wednesday evening and checked into a small motel on the outskirts of town. I had considered staying at the house where I grew up, but that bridge had been burned years ago. Instead, I spent the evening driving through neighborhoods that held a lifetime of memories, past the high school where I had been valedictorian, past the library where I had discovered my love of military history, past the hardware store that my father still ran, with the same iron determination he had always possessed. The town hadn't changed much. Same tree-lined streets. Same mix of family businesses and chain stores. Same sense of quiet prosperity that came from generations of people who worked hard and expected little beyond a comfortable life and a peaceful retirement. It was a good place to grow up, I realized, just not the right place for someone like me. Thursday morning dawned gray and cold, typical March weather for Ohio. I dressed carefully in my service uniform, checking every detail twice. The creases were sharp enough to cut, the brass polished to a mirror finish, the ribbons arranged in perfect alignment. If I was going to attend my mother's funeral against my family's wishes, I was going to do it as the Marine officer I had become, not the disappointed daughter they remembered. St. Mark's Lutheran Church sat on a quiet corner, surrounded by oak trees that had been there since before I was born. Cars were already filling the parking lot when I arrived, and I recognized many of them as belonging to neighbors and family friends who had known me since childhood. I wondered what they thought of my family's decision to ban me from the service, whether they understood the rift that had developed between us. I parked across the street and sat in my car for several minutes, gathering my courage for what was about to happen. Through the church windows, I could see people moving around inside, making final preparations for the service. Someone had placed a large photograph of my mother near the altar, showing her as I remembered her best. Smiling, kind, the woman who had raised 3 children with patience and grace, despite the challenges life had thrown at her. At exactly 10 o'clock, I walked up the front steps of the church and through the double doors that led into the sanctuary. The effect was immediate and electric. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as heads turned to see who had arrived. I heard sharp intakes of breath, the rustle of fabric as people shifted in their seats, the kind of silence that comes when something unexpected and dramatic happens in a small town. My father was standing near the front of the church, greeting mourners and accepting condolences. When he saw me, his face went through a series of expressions: surprise, anger, embarrassment, and finally something that might have been resignation. He started toward me, probably intending to enforce his ban on my attendance, but he never made it. That's when they appeared. The first Marine I saw was Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez, fully recovered from his wounds and wearing his dress blue uniform with the same precision I had demanded from my own appearance. Behind him came Corporal Jenkins, Lance Corporal Washington, and 9 other Marines from my platoon, all in perfect military bearing, all watching me with expressions of fierce loyalty and determination. They had flown in from Camp Pendleton, using their own leave time and money to attend the funeral of their commanding officer's mother. Not because they had known her, but because they knew me, and Marines don't let each other face difficult moments alone. Rodriguez approached me first, coming to attention and rendering a crisp salute. "Permission to attend the service, ma'am," he said in a voice that carried clearly through the suddenly silent church. "Permission granted, Gunny," I replied, returning his salute with the same precision. One by one, my Marines approached and saluted, each using the same formal request and receiving the same formal response. It was a display of military courtesy and respect that transformed the entire atmosphere of the church, from awkward family drama to something approaching ceremony. But it was Corporal Jenkins who delivered the moment that changed everything. He approached me last, came to attention with parade ground precision, and in a voice that could be heard throughout the church said, "Ready to pay our respects to your mother, Commander, ma'am." Commander! Not lieutenant, not captain, but commander, the title I had earned through promotion after my actions in Afghanistan, but had never mentioned to my family. The title that carried with it the authority to lead hundreds of Marines and the responsibility for their lives and welfare. The word hit the church like a thunderclap. I heard gasps from the congregation, saw my father's face go pale as the significance sank in. These weren't just random Marines who had shown up to support a friend. These were combat veterans, decorated professionals, who were treating me with the kind of respect reserved for senior officers. My brother Michael, standing near the front of the church in his business suit, looked like he had been struck by lightning. My sister Jessica, dressed in black and holding tissues for the tears she had been shedding, stared at me with an expression of complete incomprehension. But it was my father's reaction that mattered most. Robert Mitchell, the man who had spent my entire childhood dismissing my military ambitions as fantasies, was seeing for the first time what those fantasies had actually become. His daughter wasn't playing soldier. She was a decorated Marine officer, respected and honored by men who had followed her into combat and trusted her with their lives. The funeral service itself passed in a blur. The pastor spoke about my mother's devotion to her family and her quiet strength in the face of adversity. Friends and neighbors shared memories of her kindness and generosity. My brother gave a eulogy that focused on her role as a wife and mother, carefully avoiding any mention of the daughter she had lost to military service. But throughout the service, I was acutely aware of the 12 Marines sitting in perfect silence behind me, their presence a visible reminder that I had built a life and earned respect far beyond anything my family had imagined possible. After the service, as people filed out of the church, something remarkable happened. Instead of the awkward confrontation I had expected, neighbors and family friends approached me with expressions of curiosity and respect. They had questions about my military service, about the Marines who had come to honor my mother, about the path that had taken me so far from Cedar Falls. Mrs. Henderson, who had been my second-grade teacher, shook my hand with tears in her eyes. "I always knew you were special, Sarah. I just never imagined how special." Mr. Patterson, who owned the auto repair shop where I had bought my first car, studied the ribbons on my uniform with obvious interest. "That's quite a collection of medals, young lady. I'm guessing each one has a story." But it was my father who provided the moment I had been waiting for without knowing it. He approached me as I stood beside my mother's casket, preparing to say my final goodbye. For a moment, we simply looked at each other, father and daughter separated by years of misunderstanding and mutual disappointment. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I spent so many years trying to protect you from making what I thought was a mistake that I never bothered to find out whether you were actually making one." "Dad, you don't need to—" "Yes, I do," he interrupted. "I called you a disappointment. I said you were wasting your time with fantasies. I was wrong about everything." He looked past me at the Marines who were waiting respectfully nearby, then back at my face. "Commander Mitchell," he said, testing the title like he was learning a new language. "I'm proud of you, Sarah. I should have said that years ago, but I was too stubborn and too scared to admit that you knew something about yourself that I didn't." The words I had waited my entire life to hear, spoken over my mother's casket in front of a church full of people who had watched our family struggle with my decision to leave Cedar Falls. It wasn't the reunion I had dreamed of as a young woman, but it was something better. Recognition and respect earned through accomplishment rather than granted through blood. "Thank you, Dad," I said simply. The burial was a smaller affair, attended only by immediate family and close friends. My Marines stood at attention throughout the graveside service, their silent presence adding a dignity and solemnity that honored my mother's memory better than any words could have. As the pastor spoke the final prayers and my mother's casket was lowered into the earth, I thought about the woman who had quietly supported my dreams even when she couldn't openly encourage them. She had died without seeing me in uniform, without knowing about the medals I had earned or the respect I had gained. But somehow I believed she had understood what I was becoming long before anyone else did. After the burial, my father approached me one final time. In his hand was a small wooden box that I recognized from his desk at the hardware store. "Your mother asked me to give this to you if anything ever happened to her," he said. "She made me promise, even though I didn't understand why at the time." Inside the box was the acceptance letter from the military leadership program I had been denied as a teenager, carefully preserved and accompanied by a note in my mother's handwriting. "For my brave daughter, who always knew who she was meant to be. I love you more than words can express." I closed the box and held it against my chest, feeling a connection to my mother that transcended the years of separation and misunderstanding. She had seen something in me that others had missed, believed in me when belief required courage, and preserved a symbol of my dreams even when those dreams had been dismissed by everyone else. The drive back to California was different from the journey east. I was no longer the band daughter returning home in defiance of family wishes. First was a Marine officer who had honored her mother's memory and found a measure of peace with the family that had never understood her choices. My Marines had returned to their own lives and duties, but their presence at the funeral had accomplished something profound. They had shown my family and my hometown exactly who I had become, not through words or explanations, but through the simple act of honoring someone they respected. 6 months later, I received a letter from my father. It was brief, written in his careful handwriting on hardware store letterhead. "Sarah," it began, "I've been thinking about what you said years ago, about following your heart even when it scared the people who loved you. I understand now that courage isn't just about facing enemy fire. Sometimes it's about facing the disappointment of people whose approval you thought you needed. You have more courage than anyone I've ever known, and I'm proud to be your father." I kept that letter, just as my mother had kept my acceptance letter all those years. Not because I needed his approval anymore, but because it represented something important. The possibility of understanding across the divisions that separate us, the power of accomplishment to change perspectives, and the truth that some bridges, once burned, can be rebuilt stronger than before. The Marine Corps had given me many things: discipline, purpose, the respect of men and women who understood what it meant to serve something larger than yourself. But perhaps most importantly, it had given me the strength to become exactly who I was meant to be, regardless of whether others understood or approved. My name is Commander Sarah Mitchell, United States Marine Corps, and I am proud of every choice that brought me to where I am today. The small-town girl who built obstacle courses in her backyard grew up to lead Marines in combat, and no one can ever take that away from me. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.